All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Lane. I'm the Special Collections Librarian for the Indianapolis Public Library, and I'm here with Bill McNiece, and we're going to talk about vice presidents and vice presidential candidates that are buried at Crown Hill Cemetery here in Indianapolis. And we look forward to any questions that you have. Please type those in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. All right, Bill, go ahead and take it away. He is the president of the Marion County Historical Society, and he's wonderful. So, yes, take it away, please.
Well, let's see here. Have to find, there it is. And I'll share that. And we'll view a slideshow. I'll close that down. So I am hoping that now you are hearing me and that you're seeing my screen.
Yes, we do.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So thanks to everyone for joining me today for a virtual walk through Crown Hill Cemetery to look at graves of U.S. vice presidents and candidates who are buried there. And I wish we could have done this in person, and maybe someday we can, but we'll do this virtually here today. Okay, now let's move here. Okay, so let's begin just a little bit with presidents and vice presidents. So the United States has had 45 presidents with 46 presidencies and a few more vice presidents. And a question we can start with is, what states are they from? And kind of related to that, are we talking where were they born, or where did they spend most of their time? And I think a good way to think about it is states of primary affiliation. So more the state where the individual resided as an adult than the state where necessarily that individual was born. If you look then at the US presidents by state of affiliation, New York, Ohio, Virginia, and Massachusetts are at the top of the list, with Indiana listed among 11 others as a state that has had one president coming from that state. So New York in the lead, and if we look at the vice presidents, New York is still in the lead. But in contrast to the presidents, Indiana is number 2 with 6 vice presidents with Indiana as their state of affiliation. So I think that puts us in a remarkable place when we talk about vice presidents. These 6 United States vice presidents from Indiana, one of them is buried in the city cemetery in South Bend. 2 are living, and 3 are buried in Crown Hill Cemetery here in Indianapolis. Additionally, there are 3 individuals who were unsuccessful candidates for vice presidents, also buried at Crown Hill, and we'll have a look at their monuments as well. So if we think of all these folks in chronological order, they began in 1852 with George Julian and extending up into most recently former Vice President Pence, with these listed in between. And as I have them listed here, again, chronological order, I have them listed as either winners or unsuccessful candidates. They lost their election. CH means that they are buried in Crown Hill, and so we'll be visiting their sites virtually today. And we will go on from there. So while we can think of them usually in chronological order, we're doing a virtual walk today, recall. And so we're actually going to visit them in more of a convenient geographic order, so that if you decide to go out and pay a visit sometime, this may be the route that you would want to take, just to make for a nice walk through the cemetery and seeing these graves and monuments. Well, this is an image from Google just pointing out where everything is. Marion County here, and then we can see there's a kind of a green patch here in the relative center of the county. Downtown, the circle is right here, and this is where we're going to be interested. And we can look at this again, Google map here, and just to orient you here, we have Boulevard Place here and 38th Street here. and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Street here. And this is the area that we're looking at. If Crown Hill extends up into this area, their main area is here north of 38th Street now, but we're going to be interested more in this area south of 38th Street today. And if we look at this map from the Crown Hill Cemetery, this is an image taken from them. And I'll note for you here that north is this direction with this map. But I'm going to take this map and turn it on its side so that north is to the right. So all of the map images that I'm going to show you from this point forward, north is going to be to the right. So keep that orientation in mind. We've got Boulevard Place that will be at the bottom of all the maps. And then the 34th Street entrance is where we're going to be starting and finishing our virtual walk through the cemetery. We're going to focus just on this part south of 38th Street here as we'll go walking in and around this area of the cemetery. Well, this is the 34th Street entrance, an image of that to Crown Hill. And we will start with an image, and here we go. I'm Bill McNiece. I'm president of the Marion County Historical Society. The Marion County Historical Society presents a series of programs annually to individuals interested in the history of the county. Traditionally, these have been presented at locations of interest or in an auditorium. But with COVID concerns, we've shifted our presentations to all virtual for 2020. Today, we will virtually visit the burial sites of 6 individuals from Indiana who either served as vice presidents of the United States or who were unsuccessful candidates for that office. All of these individuals are buried in Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. I'm standing near the 34th Street entrance to Crown Hill Cemetery off Boulevard Place. Crown Hill was founded September 25th of 1863 and formally dedicated on July 1st, 1864. Its Gothic chapel dates from 1875. We'll see that virtually later. The 3-passage Gothic gate and the related waiting station behind me date from 1885. Well, with this as an introduction to Crown Hill, we'll move on through the Gothic gate to work our way through the cemetery to look at the grave markers of and to recognize each of these 6 individuals. Please come join me. And from there, we will move on. So this is the map that I showed you earlier. And again, to orient you, north is to the right. This is Boulevard Place here. The image that you just saw was from me about here. And we're going to walk through the gates and head up towards the Gothic chapel and the first and second sites that we'll be visiting. So as we head up, we're going to walk through the gates, head up the white path, and we'll keep strolling along the white path, and we can see in the distance here the Gothic chapel. As we get close to it, we will notice a monument here and a monument here with the Gothic chapel here. And we're going to keep going because if you take this tour yourself, odds on you may want to park somewhere near the Gothic chapel. So perhaps over here. But if we park there and we back up, we can see this monument right here. And we'll approach it a little closer. And we can see this monument here for Thomas A. Hendrix. Thomas Hendrix, born in Ohio, 1819, grew up in Shelby County, gets a degree from Hanover down in southern Indiana, is admitted to the bar, serves as a Democrat, and notably resided in the Bates Hendrix house on the south side of Indianapolis for some years of his life. This is an image of that house on South New Jersey Street. He was active throughout his life in Democratic politics, serving as both a U.S. representative and an Indiana governor. In 1876, he ran as a vice presidential candidate with Samuel Tilden against Rutherford Hayes. This was an example of Tilden Hendrix winning more than 50% of the popular vote, but losing in the Electoral College. And in this case, it was in an outcome determined by an electoral commission resulting from an action of Congress. And so that was in 1876. He again ran as a vice presidential candidate in 1884, this time with Grover Cleveland as a presidential candidate. This despite Hendrix not being in great health at that period of time. And in this case, the Cleveland-Hendrix ticket won. Unfortunately, Hendrix was not able to complete that term, dying in 1885 back in Indianapolis. And we can see the marker here, Thomas A. Hendrix and his birth and date at the base of that monument that I showed you earlier. And if we turn to the right from that monument of Hendrix, look across the road to the left of this frame, would be back where the Gothic chapel is. And we can see a monument right across the road here, this one right here that you saw a little bit of earlier in this view. And this is the family plot for the Fairbanks family. Let's look closer. The lead name on this is Charles Warren Fairbanks. Charles Fairbanks, also Ohio born, and in this case raised and educated in Ohio, moves to Indianapolis in 1874, where he's involved in financial affairs of railroads and, oddly enough, particularly bankrupt railroads. He becomes active in Republican politics in the 1880s and 90s, becomes personally wealthy, and with his uncle purchases the Indianapolis News. He is a supporter of McKinley for president, serves as U.S. Senator in 1897 through 05, and in 04 is elected as vice president with Theodore Roosevelt as president and serves one term as U.S. vice president. In 1908, Roosevelt doesn't run for a second term and elects to support Taft rather than Fairbanks. In 1912, Roosevelt runs for a second term as a bull moose and Fairbanks supports Taft. And then in 1916, Fairbanks runs as vice president with Charles Evan Hughes, and in this case loses to Wilson and to Thomas Marshall as the vice presidential candidate. So he was both successful and unsuccessful. Towards the end of his life, his health begins to fail. He continues to reside in Indianapolis and pursues a variety of interests and lives in a home at 2960 North Meridian Street until his death in 1918. And this is an image of his home, and you may have seen it if you've ever visited the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. Right across 30th Street to the south is the Charles Fairbanks home, now part of a business complex located there just south of 30th Street on Meridian. And there are a number of family burial sites there, and this is his marker, Charles Warren Fairbanks, within the Fairbanks plot there. Okay, so if we back up, then we can look across the way. Remember, get ourselves oriented again. This is the Gothic chapel, and we came up this way. We kind of parked our virtual car here, and so we're going to make a right turn here and head down following these green markers off to the right. And we're going to follow this green path along our way down to our next site for Thomas Marshall, site number 3 here. As we leave, then we can follow this path or follow this road past the National Cemetery, and we'll make our first right here. And as we make the right and make our bend here, we can see in the distance the site that we're coming to next. And we keep walking or driving, and we can see here now in the center of the frame the burial place for Thomas Riley Marshall. Thomas Riley Marshall, born in Indiana, 1854. The family moves around some, but returns to Indiana and to Columbia City. And he comes from a family with a strong Democratic family tradition. Early on, matriculates to Wabash College, graduates from there, moves to Fort Wayne, reads law there, and is admitted to the bar on his 21st birthday. Practices law there, and in 1908 becomes, I would describe him as the compromised Democratic candidate for governor here in Indiana, and is successful, and is viewed as having a generally successful governorship. In 1912, Woodrow Wilson is nominated for president after 46 ballots. Pretty remarkable nominating convention there in 1912. And Thomas Marshall joins Wilson as the vice presidential candidate. Wilson and Marshall defeat Taft and Fairbanks, remember that name, from earlier, and Theodore Roosevelt's Progressive Bull Moose Party. Marshall carried out the duties of vice president, and as you recall from earlier, there's not a lot of duties of vice president as spelled out in the Constitution, and he managed to find time to head out on the lecture circuit for some extra money. He was well recognized for his wit and overall good nature. There's a couple of quotes that are attributed to him. Once there were two brothers. One ran away to sea. The other was elected vice president, and nothing was heard of either of them again. And also the quote, "What this country needs is a really good 5-cent cigar," is attributed to him as well. Marshall was challenged in his term as vice president by the infirmity of Woodrow Wilson following Wilson's stroke in 1919. And Marshall, while there was significant pushes as to, with Wilson's infirmity, how to deal with that, but Wilson refused to assume the role of president as long as Wilson was living. And so he ended up completing 2 full terms as vice president in 1921. Marshall then returns to Indiana. It gives a series of lectures. He makes a number of political speeches, serves on the board of trustees of Wabash College, and then dies in 1925 during a visit to Washington, D.C. His body is returned to Indiana, to Indianapolis, and is buried here in Crown Hill Cemetery. So that then completes the visit to our 3 vice presidents buried at Crown Hill. And from here, we'll continue our walk on. And we're going to take our walk from the Thomas Marshall site here back along the way that we came and go from there. So this is a look. Noted that the Marshall is buried in a kind of a somewhat round plot here. And if we walk around this way and then back to here, then we can get ourselves reoriented and looking back towards the way that we came. This is the back of the Marshall burial site here. So we're going to continue our walk up this direction, and we will walk along. Again, remember the green markers here along our way back. And as we get partway up, we'll see a road coming off to the right, and we're going to turn right there, make a right-hand turn onto this road here. And looking into the distance, we can see another monument. And this monument that we're seeing and coming close to on our walk up towards it is up a bit of a hill. And this monument then is the monument of William English. And William English is part of an English family here. We can see William Hayden English, and there are other Englishes buried in this family plot here. William Hayden English, born in 1922 in Scott County, studies also at Hanover, reads law, is admitted to the bar, practices for a time in Scott County, the area of his birth, is also a Democrat. He works for a time in Washington, D.C. He is elected as a representative to the Indiana legislature from Scott County in 1951, and then is elected as a representative from Indiana to the U.S. Congress in 1852 to 1861. He chooses not to run for re-election in 1860, returns to Indiana, moves to Indianapolis, and is active in banking. Does well, both in banking and in investing. 1863, with others, organizes the First National Bank of Indianapolis. He becomes the controlling shareholder of the Indianapolis Street Railway Company, constructs a number of houses along English Avenue on the southeast part of the county, and then in 1880 constructs the initial phases of English's Opera House. This is an image of the English Opera House, English Hotel and Opera House, located in the northwest corner of the Indianapolis Circle downtown. In 1880, Winfield Scott wins the Democratic nomination for president, and English is selected as his vice presidential running mate. This is not successful. They're defeated in the general election by James Garfield and Chester Arthur. English returns to Indiana. He spends his time collecting data, images, and documents related to early Indiana, and writes a 2-volume work on George Rogers Clark. He is also very active in the reorganization of the Indiana Historical Society and serves as its president from 1886 to 1896. His monument, located here also in a circular area here, is in a bit of a rise within Crown Hill Cemetery. And having visited him, we're going to move back down and take the same path back that we walked in virtually, and we will end up at our next monument location here, and that's number 5 here. So we're going to leave the English site here, come back down the same road that we came up, and we're walking virtually downhill now, and we will continue our walk, make a right turn back along these blue markers, back to the National Cemetery, where we'll make a walk and make a left turn here, and come back towards the Gothic Cemetery. And as we approach this intersection here with the Hendrix Monument that we saw earlier, located here, then we'll make a left turn and begin our path back towards the 34th Street entrance. And as we walk down, we will see off to the right another monument. And as we get closer to it, this is the monument of George Washington Julian, and his marker. George Washington Julian, born 1817 in Centerville, Wayne County in eastern Indiana, comes from a strong Quaker family, taught briefly, read law, becomes licensed in law in 1840 and enters practice in Centerville. In 1845, he is elected as a representative to the Indiana legislature with the Whig Party. He expresses strong anti-slavery views as a representative. In 1848, then wins election as a representative to the U.S. Congress as a free soiler, a different party. Then in 1852, runs for vice president on the Free Democrat ticket. Isn't very successful, receives about 5% of the popular vote. And then in Indianapolis becomes part of an organizing group that founds the Republican Party. And in 1861 to 71, serves as a representative in the US Congress. In 1883, he moves to Irvington and finds that he needs a job. And so in 1884, becomes a Democrat and receives the office of Surveyor General of New Mexico and serves in this position. So if you were counting, I think he was a member of 5 different political parties over the course of his career. In 1889, he then returns to Irvington, where he dies there in 1899. And I return to his marker. And so he is the, I think, earliest of the individuals who ran for vice president, although he was unsuccessful in that pursuit. From there, we will, and all of these have been relatively short walks for these 5 different graves that we have visited. And from here, we're going to take a little bit longer virtual walk. And there is a shortcut if you're walking, but we're going to take a little more identifiable path. And so from here, we're going to walk our way back towards the 34th Street gate. And just before we get there, we will make a left-hand turn heading north, and we will see our 6th site of our virtual walk today. So we will head back. Now we're heading pretty much towards the east, following the white markers that will lead us back to the 34th Street gate. We will continue on down. We can see the gate in the distance, and the path that we will take is to come down here and make this left turn, coming from here, making the left turn. And the site of where this image was taken is with our backs in the direction of the 34th Street gate. So we're going to make this turn here and walk along, following the now yellow lines, and then make a left-hand turn here. And we will walk down a ways and look in the distance for this marker. And this one's kind of in the middle of the plot. I think the easiest way to find it is to look for this marker with the Perez name on it and look into the distance, and we can walk towards it, and we can find the marker for the Kern family, the Kern plot, which includes the burial site of John W. Kern in his headstone marker here. John Worth Kern, born in Howard County, Indiana, moves to Iowa, but then returns to Indiana. He is a Democrat. He obtains his teacher's license at age 15, studies law, and by 1869 opens a law practice in Kokomo up in Howard County. In 1884, he is elected as a Democrat to the office of reporter for the Indiana Supreme Court and moves to Indianapolis. In 1892, he is elected as a senator by the Indiana legislature and advocates for labor rights and child welfare. Now, this is 1892. To back up a little bit, in 1900, he is the Democratic candidate for governor, isn't successful. In 1904, Democratic governor for governor, also unsuccessful. In 1908, serves as vice presidential candidate with William Jennings Bryan. That is defeated by William Howard Taft. But in 1910, as mentioned, selected as U.S. Senator from Indiana by the Indiana legislature. Now recall that that's the 17th Amendment that changes this. So to back up, he is selected as U.S. Senator in 1910. The 17th Amendment amends the Constitution to provide that U.S. senators would be selected by voters of the individual states rather than by the legislators of the individual states. So this is ratified in 1913. And so the process is then changed from 1910, where he is selected by the legislature until his term would be next up in 1916. So in 1913, he is elected as majority leader of the U.S. Senate. He advocates for progressive legislation. But in 1916, he faces, in one sense, re-election, or in another sense, election by the voters of Indiana, and loses that election. He falls ill with tuberculosis and then dies in 1917. And so that has then taken us from our walk here, starting at the 34th Street gate, up, back, and now we're ready to leave the site of John Worth Kern. As we do that, we'll turn around. Remember, his burial site is kind of in the middle of an area here. So we're coming back to this road here, and we'll turn right and find our way back. We can see the 34th Street waiting station here in the distance. And as we approach it, then we have completed our virtual walk, and we will. Well, we're back at the 34th Street Gothic Gate again. Thanks for joining me in this virtual walk to visit the graves of vice presidents and vice presidential candidates at Crown Hill Cemetery. Had we done this as an in-person walk from the Gothic Chapel, we would have covered about 7/10 of a mile to visit the first 5 graves. Visiting the 6th grave would have added about another 6/10 of a mile, as would have the walk from here at the gate to the Gothic Chapel. There are some grades on the way. More information about Crown Hill can be found at the Crown Hill Heritage Foundation website at crownhillhf.org. I invite you to also visit the Marion County Historical Society website at mchsindy.org from time to time. It includes This Week in Indianapolis, clippings about the news in Indianapolis from a century ago, along with a timeline of Marion County history. You will also find a listing of upcoming programs about people, places, and happenings in the history of the county. For now, all of our programs are virtual, so you can join us from anywhere that you have web access. And so until we meet again, I wish you good health and a good week. So a few notes to conclude what were our visit today. So the photos that you have seen, unless otherwise indicated, are all by me. The maps are from Crown Hill Cemetery or Google. The 2 primary sources, both by Ralph Gray, a gentleman from Indiana, National Party candidates, 1836 to 1840. All of the vice presidential images are taken from another of his works, Indiana's Favorite Sons, 1840 to 1940. And a particular thanks to Stephen Lane, Secretary of the Marion County Historical Society, Indianapolis Special Collections librarian, and responsible, and thanks to him for the videography and for the Zoom mastering of our virtual visit today. And that is the end of my formal presentation here.